Good evening and welcome to On the Line with Dilip Sarkar. And I can assure everybody this is going to be an interesting chat because Dilip, I hope you don't mind me saying, is quite the chatterbox. But before we get going, just a reminder that if you would like to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to get through as many of those as we possibly can. And as always, we need to give a shout out to our funders, the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Dilip, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Pleasure.
So we've talked about a lot of things. I've known you for about, I think about 45 minutes. And I've already asked you when's the biography coming out. But we're here to talk about the Battle of Britain, of course.
And indeed.
Where did all this start for you before we come to remembrance? I mean, you've written a magnum opus, haven't you? Tell us a bit about where it all started.
Right. Well, growing up in the 1960s, I mean, I'm 64 now. I think that the Second World War was omnipresent, and your neighbours have been in it, your grandparents, your family members, teachers. The war films were relentlessly broadcast, weren't they? The Dam Busters, Reach for the Sky, The Sea Shall Not Have Them, Albert RN. I mean, it was just a relentless bombardment, and Commando comics and Warlord and Victor and Valiant, Captain Hurricane and his Raging Furies, and they were just brilliant. And I bought into all of this, I was Second World War mad. Our neighbour was a Navy man, actually. John Anthony, he'd been in the First and Second World War, absolutely fantastic bloke. Spent a lot of time with them talking about the old days, and they were very happy to talk about the war. But my maternal grandfather was Grenadier Guards, wounded and captured in Belgium, 21st of May 1940, and he never spoke about the war. So it kind of seemed to me that there was a juxtaposition there, and there was a bit more to it than the gung-ho comics and things like that. And I made models. My uncle made large-scale flying Spitfires, so there'd always been a Spitfire about, and that was really it, and I bought into the whole thing. And then when I'd already made countless, Anorak, Hurricane, Spitfires, Messerschmitts, Heinkels, all that sort of thing, and read a lot about it. And when I was 8, the Battle of Britain film came out, and that was amazing because it was on the big screen, it was in color, and largely it was real airplanes. It was absolutely breathtaking watching that film, and it just got into my soul, and then probably about 4 years later, when I was about 12, I started looking at local sort of World War II occurrences and things like that. And then I became aware when I was about 18 that some of the pilots who'd been killed in the Battle of Britain were that age. And that just shocked me, especially when I found one or two of their graves overgrown, which were private graves, not Commonwealth War Graves Commission tended, obviously, where families had become extinct or moved away, and I just thought, this is terrible. So I really, I suppose, decided that I was going to do something about it. I had no idea how. And then in due course, when I met Battle of Britain pilots and so on, and I always remember Peter Fox, who was a 19-year-old Hurricane pilot in the battle. He described himself as one of the also-rans. And it was the also-rans I was interested in, because whereas the famous pilots had a platform to tell their story, the also-rans hadn't. And I was determined to give them a platform and tell their stories, whether they liked it or not, sort of thing, And that was where it all started. And I had no idea that it was gonna go the way it has. It's taken over, just took my life on a completely different course.
So you've got a bit of a nickname as an aviation detective, but I didn't realize the detective part also is another aspect of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, I was in the police for 22 years, and I was a detective for quite a long time. So I've sort of got an investigative mind, if you like, which comes naturally with research, and I'm like a dog with a bone with it. when I get something to look at, and I just find it fascinating being able to unravel these things. You know, who shot down who crashed where, whatever it might be, and go into the original documents to find this new information. And some of the things I've discovered, you know, have been really stunning. When you get that discovery, it's like, oh, it's just brilliant. It's like slipping the net under a 30-pound carp, you know, which is another passion of mine. So yeah, an
So,
aviation detective, yeah.
aviation detective, you talk about also rans. These are
Mm,
obviously people, as you said, don't have a platform or aren't famous enough to have a platform.
that's right.
How important is that aspect of your work to you?
Oh, hugely. And in fact, what really inspired it to begin with was the stories of casualties, and that those people had no voice. It was a question of giving the dead a voice, really,
Mm.
so that their stories were properly recorded. And it was through starting to research casualties stories that brought me into contact with surviving pilots who flew with those people. And in the end, you know, the volume of work that I was doing, I mean, it was just crazy, really. And that's how it all sort of happened. And then talking to these wonderful people, and you realize the extent of their experience. And I suppose being a bit of a chatterbox and being, being a professional interviewer, which I was as a detective, you know, I never had a problem sort of squeezing the information out of them, really. They were happy to talk to me. And I think that it was about timing, because when I came on the scene doing this really seriously, which is 40 years ago, say more, the guys were about the same age as I am now, and they just retired. So for the first time, they got time to sit and reflect on the past and maybe reconnect with their past. And I think that most of them I knew had difficulty communicating that experience to their own children.
Mm.
And it was almost as if it skipped a generation. But they could talk to me because I knew so much about it. And I remember George Unwin, who was one of my favourites. George was the first NCO pilot to ever fly a Spitfire. And he was one of the most aggressive pilots in Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain. Absolutely brilliant bloke. And I remember it being in his bungalow, probably about 1989, and George talking about something to do with 19 Squadron at Duxford, and saying, "Oh, come on, Dilip, you remember him? Come on, what was his name? You remember him?" And I thought, well, I don't remember him because I wasn't actually there,
Mm.
but I know who you're talking about. So, yeah,
They're of a
interesting.
generation, though, aren't they? Where there's, I mean, a reluctance to talk about these things, isn't it? That was what had to be done, and it kind of sort of stays in the past. I mean, I hear what you're saying about, being a chatterbox and easy, but it couldn't have been easy, especially in the first instance, to get people to start talking.
I think, no, I never really had a problem. I mean, not most of them, they were only too happy to help all they could. I suppose it depends on your approach, really, I
Mm.
guess. And my initial approach, was researching casualties, and is now and always will be. So, starting from that standpoint was a good starting place, really. So, and that was the interesting thing, because they're all very, very happy to talk about other people. It's a bit like, were you a hero in the war? No, but I served in a company of heroes. Exactly that.
Yeah.
So, because I wasn't saying to them, what was your experience? What did you do? They were happy to talk forever about other people.
Mm.
But within that comes their own experience. And then I think, I gathered such a reputation within the Battle of Britain Fighter Association, membership of which was the few themselves, that they knew that if I approached them, if I came to see them, I was a genuine researcher, and a professional,
Mm.
and they were happy to speak. So it was just a bit of a snowball effect, really. Incredible.
So, in terms of the books, you've written 8 books, if I'm right. And I think you said to me when we met before this call started that you've covered every action and every squadron
Yeah.
in
So I've written over 60 books
right.
altogether. And I've just this big project. I thought, I've written lots of books. They're not all about the Battle of Britain, as we discussed this afternoon when we had a bit of a precursing chat. Most of them emanate from the Battle of Britain or are about different aspects of the Battle of Britain, or mainly people. So people's stories are all different. And of course, the pilots went on to fly in Italy, the desert, Normandy, all over. So no two stories are the same. So you've got lots and lots and lots of different books. But the big project, I was thinking I've done all of that, but really I need to write a new account of the Battle of Britain, the most detailed account that's ever been written. And it needs to go right back to original sources, British and German. And it doesn't just need to be about fighter command. It needs to be about bomber commands operations during the battle, coastal commands operations, photographic reconnaissance operations, the Royal Navy, and the home front. So, we've got this wonderful source of the Ministry of Information, where there were polls and questionnaires, to people, so we know what people were feeling at the time. So that's what I did. So this is a lifetime's research, and it took the 8 volumes involved took me 2 years to write, almost to the day, 2 years. And the first volume, The Gathering Storm, looks at all of the background leading up to it. And volume 2, The Breaking Storm, is about the start. Now, the start of the Battle of Britain, 10th of July, according to the Air Ministry, started on the 2nd, without a doubt, because we know much more today about the German plans. And if we're to understand that the Battle of Britain was fought to deny the Germans aerial supremacy as a prerequisite to a seaborne invasion, then the enemy have to dictate the dates of the battle, don't they? Because it can only start when air operations are appended to a stated desire or plan to invade, and that's the 2nd of July. So not the 10th, which Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowding chose when writing his dispatch on the battle. But of course, these things weren't known then. So you've got a period of fighting between the 2nd of July and the 10th of July, pilots being killed. They're not, or wounded, they're not included in the few, which is a tad unfair, I would say. So, I've given them that because it was the Battle of Britain. And then you've got, when did it end? Officially, it ended on the 31st of October, but surely it can only end when the enemy is either decisively defeated, which didn't happen, or has abandoned plans to invade. And if that's the case, it ended on the 12th of October. That fight in either side is part of a wider war, but it's not the Battle of Britain. So to me, 2nd of July to the 12th of October. But nonetheless, we covered the official dates, 10th of July to the 31st of October, and broke down the different phases of the battle, the fighting over the Channel convoys, the attacks on radar stations and airfields, the attacks on London, and then go on and so on and so forth until the end of October. And then the final book is about how the Battle of Britain has been remembered, how it's commemorated, memorialised, its place in literature, in film, and also a guide to museums, memorials, sites of interest. So it sort of rounds off the whole thing. And Princess Anne wrote a very nice foreword to that one. And the Director General of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission provided a postscript, which really pulled it all together right at the end. So it's been quite a task. And now all 8 volumes are out, ready for the 85th anniversary. And on Sunday, this coming Sunday, I'm down at the National Battle of Britain Memorial near Folkestone, doing an event revolving around pilots reported missing in the Battle of Britain, and showing a film called Forgotten, an 8-minute short film that's on YouTube by a friend of mine, Philip Harvey, and obviously doing book signing. So that's at the Battle of Britain Memorial at Capel-le-Fern. So that's the first time that we would have had all 8 volumes together. So it's quite it's quite a body of work. You know, they take up about that much on my shelf. Sort of
Yeah,
thing,
you sent me a picture. I was like, God,
yeah,
it's a lot. I
yeah.
barely struggle to write, a couple of sentences myself. Could you give us some examples of some of the things you discovered in your well, sorry, not in the 8 volumes, but from the people you spoke to that made it into the 8, or not necessarily into the book? A couple of stories that you thought highlighted an aspect, perhaps, of the battle that we don't know so much about.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, there's so many really, but just two things. Firstly, the last of the few I knew was Wing Commander Tim Alkington, John Francis Durham Alkington. Everybody called him Tim. Don't ask me why. But Tim was a 19-year-old pilot officer on one squadron flying Hurricanes down at Tangmere on the south coast. And he was shot down on the 16th of August by Helmut Wick, who was the leading German ace at the time. And he bailed out, and during his parachute descent, he passed out because he was wounded. And Flight Sergeant Fred Berry used the prop watch of his Hurricane to blow Tim towards land because he was drifting out to sea. And consequently, instead of landing in the sea when he would probably have died, he came down on the beach at East Wittering. But he never got the chance to thank Fred Berry because he was killed a few days later. So that was quite sad. And Tim, the last time I saw Tim, he died in, I think, 2019 or 18. But I went over, he lived not far from me in Gloucestershire. And I went over for a Sunday roast. And I'd done a chapter about Tim in a book called The Final Few that was published by Amberley Publishing 10 years ago. And he did all sorts, you know, he was a hurricane pilot in the Battle of Britain. Then he went out to Russia, flying Hurricanes, did all kinds of exciting things, and stayed in the Air Force, you know, made a career of it after the war, flew Shackletons, the big 4-engine maritime sub-hunter thing, you know, all kinds of things. Oh my God, trying to get him to talk about himself was really, he was hard work. I loved him to bits. He was a wonderful man, but he was hard work, and he used to drive his family to distraction because he would just be so modest. But we were having dinner, and I'd just been down to Bell 2 Lighthouse on Beachy Head, which is a bit of a high-end bed and breakfast these days. It's very nice. And while I was down, I mean, there's Spitfires coming over all the time from all Biggin Hill and God knows where now, you know. And I was talking about this, and he said, do you know, he said, during the Battle of Britain, we were on patrol and we came in over those cliffs, the Seven Sisters at Beachy Head, really low, with the cockpit canopy on the Hurricane open. And he said the yokels were down in the fields burning stubble. It was like this wood smoke. He says you could smell it in the aircraft. And he said, I looked down at that and I thought, that's England, that is, and that's worth fighting for. And it was just, oh my God, what a fantastic quote. God, if only I'd had it in a book, you know. And I came home, and I'm a big Facebooker, and I put a post on, been to see Tim Alkington, you know, wonderful Sunday lunch. And this is what Tim said. You know, of course, everybody go ballistic about this. Oh my God, that's brilliant, that's brilliant, that's brilliant. And then Tess, Tim's daughter, you know, she said, oh God, you know, Dad's having a fit because you put that on Facebook. Sort of thing. I said, why? What's the problem? You know, but he was just so modest. But what a brilliant quote. Fabulous. And then there was
sums it
sorry,
up, doesn't it? Sums up their
yeah.
motivation, what they would think. And also, these are very, very young men, aren't they, as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, we had a memorial service at Forley, not far from you in Hampshire, as I said earlier, a couple of weeks ago, for Pilot Officer Martin Oral King, who was he was the youngest. He was 18. There's been a misconception that Geoffrey Wellham, who was also 18, was the youngest, but he wasn't. We've got the birth certificates, and King was the youngest. You know, and he was shot down same day as Tim, funnily enough, 16th of August, big fight over Southampton and the Solent. And a 20 mil round went off in the cockpit and damaged his parachute. And he bailed out, and the canopy collapsed at 2,000 feet. And he crashed into a garden in Southampton and died in the arms of the occupant. And he was just 18, which is just mind blowing, really. You know, I mean, I'm not very responsible now. But when I was 18, I was absolutely and utterly irresponsible, like most people. And the interesting thing is, I doubt he could even drive a car, you know, at that age. So many of the pilots, said to me that I remember Bob Morton saying that when he was taxiing his Spitfire around West Hampton at Goodwood, he used to imagine he was driving a car because he couldn't drive a car. And that was his ultimate ambition, was to get a driver's license and drive a car. So you think that's how young they were. Tony Pickering he was also 18 during the Battle of Britain, another Hurricane pilot. And I remember Tony saying, we joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, so we trained and we learned to fly, and we were paid for it. It was brilliant. And then we got mobilized and we got called up, and suddenly you're in the Air Force with grown men. And he said, it was a different world. I mean, women and goodness knows what. And, we were so naive. We had no life experience. We've been to Sunday school and we've been brought to honor and obey our parents and not bring any disrespect on the family, and then suddenly you're catapulted into that world. So it must have been extremely difficult for them. And I will commend to anybody listening my friend Matthew Whiteman's fantastic BBC Two docudrama First Light, which is based on Jeff Whelham's book, who was an 18-year-old Spitfire pilot at Biggin Hill. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think that comes across very well in Matthew's film.
And also, they're flying state-of-the-art planes at the time as well, aren't they? So
yeah, they were.
Compared to driving a car was one thing, but you wouldn't be jumping into a Typhoon and taking it off in this day and age, would you?
Well, no, absolutely. But, I mean, they were, weren't they? I mean, everybody wanted to fly the Spitfire. And, it's absolutely to be, their attitude was, that everybody wanted to do it, but they were doing it and they were being paid for it. Happy days.
So when we talk about remembrance and how the battle is remembered, in our preamble that you've already referred to, I perhaps somewhat naively said, everybody's heard of the Battle of Britain, for which you very quickly corrected me. So that's me making assumptions, of course. Can we just touch on that a little bit? Because I think there is an assumption, perhaps it's an age thing, a cultural thing, that people are aware of this moment, but many are not, it would seem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do think it's an age thing, yes. We're probably of a similar age. We brought up that during that time when the war was omnipresent, as I said. But today, 20 years ago, I was speaking to journalists who'd never heard of Douglas Bader. Today, I'm speaking to journalists who don't know what the Battle of Britain was. I haven't got a clue. In fact, I spoke to one last week, thought it was a boxing tournament.
How do you think we should address that issue? I mean,
we're doing all we can. I was delighted to be made honorary vice president of the Battle of Britain Memorial Trust, because I wrote the series, the 8-volume mega series for the trust as its official history, because it needs to have that kind of reference, body of reference work there. And the memorial is wonderful down on the cliffs above Folkestone at Cape Fern, with the statue of the airman, and we've got the scramble experience. You've got to have an experience these days, and and it's a really big statement. The memorial is very, very important, and the battle has been memorialized quite a lot. You've got, there's the Air Force's memorial at Runnymede, which commemorates over 20,000 missing aircrew. You have the RAF memorial on the embankments at Westminster. You have the Battle of Britain monument on the embankments at Westminster. And there are countless individual memorials to pilots at the schools they went to, at their crash sites in southern England. But it's just not enough, because we have drifted so far away in time from the event. It's 85 years ago as we speak, and that generation is gone. I've sat down to dinner at the reunion dinners with 120 plus Battle of Britain aircrew in years hence, and we lost the last known living Battle of Britain pilot earlier this year, Paddy Hemingway, who was 105. I think, when he died. So, you know, that generation's gone. And it's, I don't know. I mean, what more can you do? We've got the memorials, the monuments. There's lots of stuff about the Battle of Britain on social media. Not all of it accurate, I have to say, and yeah, a lot of cut and pasting going on there. You know, in YouTube, there's lots of stuff. You know, and that is how you engage with the younger generation, I think, and particularly with computer games, with these flight simulators. I think they're great. I couldn't do them, but I did work on one once some years ago, and I think that is a really good way of getting the message across, because people's general knowledge just does not seem to be what it used to be.
Mm.
Even journalists, which you would expect it to be, really.
Or at least they'd read up about it before they spoke to you, maybe. Who is this guy?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you?
You would think so. So you've obviously had, I think, quite a close relationship to some of these
Oh,
gentlemen
very,
who've
very.
served. And obviously, as you've already said, the last known pilot or sorry, aircrew, you said, has passed away.
Well, he was pilot, yeah, he was
He was
pilot.
a pilot. So how has that impacted you, given how, you know, your relationship with these people and
Well, yeah, very difficult, because I became a de facto member of so many families, sort of thing. And yeah, it was very upsetting, because they suddenly seemed to get to a stage round about probably the early 2000s, when the departures were becoming more frequent. And I was, you know, often asked to speak at funerals, and it just became so depressing. It really did, traveling all over the country and, you know, speaking at funerals. So yes, it has been, but it's been just such a huge, incredible privilege to have known them, and you know, my sons as well, you know, have known them, and they were just wonderful people. And I'm not a sycophant. I don't think just because you're a Battle of Britain pilot, you're a great guy. Doesn't necessarily work like that, does it? You know, but certainly they were all very kind to me and gave me of their time, unreservedly, and travelled all over the country in years past to my book launches and exhibitions and things like that. You know, I mean, the most pilots I ever had at a book signing, this is hard to believe now, this is 1994, and there were 40 there, 40 sat signing books, 40 Battle of Britain pilots. Imagine that. It's just incredible. And do you know what? I'm got hardly any photographs of it, because in those days we didn't have mobile phones, and photography was intrusive.
yeah.
You know, plus I'm sat there signing books all day, so I haven't got time to do it. But things like going to the reunion dinners of the Battle of Britain Fighter Association at Bentley Priory, which was Dowding, Air Chief Marshal Dowding's fighter command headquarters during the Battle of Britain. You know, I mean, I have no photographs of that, because although I got a little camera in my pocket, it just did not seem appropriate to start taking photographs of people and pestering people. It was their time to be together, and you didn't want to intrude upon that in that way. It wouldn't be a problem now, because mobiles are just so inobtrusive, and it's all a part of our selfie life, isn't it? You know, I wouldn't hesitate to do it now, but back then it was different.
Yeah.
Very different.
So what are your thoughts on the way the Battle of Britain has been portrayed in popular culture? Because you've alluded to watching the film, the 1960s film that came out. What do you think about, as I say, the Battle of Britain in popular culture?
Well, it's interesting in film. Let's talk about film, because it's gone through different phases where, you know, after the war, there were these like Angels 1-5, which is a dreadful. I don't like Angels 1-5. Burn me at the stake if you like, but I don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is because it is posher than posh, and the only reference to the working classes are a couple of aero mechanics, ERCs as they were called, who were just made to look stupid. I think it's a terrible film, terrible. And then you got Reach for the Sky, which is based on Brickhill's romantic story of Douglas Bader, which is pretty far removed from the truth in many respects, I can tell you. and that's again, in the wake of the Second World War, these films were so important because Britain's part in total victory is a big part of the national story, or it was. And if that's a big part of the national story, the pivotal moment in that has to be the Battle of Britain, because if Britain had fallen, there wouldn't have been any other battles. There would have been no base in Northwest Europe to carry on waging war against Hitler, and which ultimately, with American help, the liberation of enemy occupied Europe was launched. It wouldn't have happened. So it's a real pivotal thing. So you had those sort of films that were all very gung-ho. And I think, the Battle of Britain film, the 1969 film, it has done the Battle of Britain great service. And I co-wrote a book about the film with the late Robert Ruddle, which has been a hugely successful book. Can't understand why. Why are people so interested in the film? We've sold thousands and thousands and thousands of them. Absolutely amazes me. But yeah, and then you had a dearth of nothing at all. After the Battle of Britain, there didn't really seem to be any room to maneuver, really, because the aircraft assembled made the film company the 35th largest air force in the world, believe it or not. It did. And the Heinkel's, well, they were Heinkel's Messerschmitts, they were a derivative, and they have Merlin engines, ironically, but they were provided by the Spanish Air Force. They were their frontline aircraft at the time. But then there was nothing for years and years and years. And we had that thing, Perfect Hero, with Nigel Havers, some time ago, back in about what, 1990, early 90s, loosely based on Richard Hillary, who was shot down and very badly burnt and wrote the classic memoir, The Last Enemy. But that was a bit wishy-washy. And then I don't think that. And then there was Piece of Cake, based on Derek Robinson's novel, which was quite a different sort of way of looking at it all. And then more recently we've had Matthew's excellent, in my opinion, BBC Two docudrama First Light. So it's changed. And what Matthew did with First Light I thought was brilliant, because Jeff was still alive then, Jeff Wellham, and he was filming Jeff talking about it, saying some amazing things like the Spitfire just got into my soul. And you asked me to forget. How can I forget being a Spitfire pilot in the Battle of Britain? I still have nightmares about it, and all these sort of, it's just absolutely brilliant. And then it will phase into the actual sort of drama side of it. It's really, really good. It's a very clever way of doing it, I thought. And then, will there be anything else? Doubt it. I hope they never try and remake the Battle of Britain film, because it's what it is, and it's cast in stone. It's done the battle great service, I think.
And a fabulous soundtrack as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sir William Walton. I'll tell you something. Ron Goodwin wrote a lot of it, and Ron Goodwin came to the launch of our book about the Battle of Britain film. That would have been 2000 or 1999, I think it was. And my son James was about 8 at the time, and I said to James, "Oh, come with me. I want to introduce you to somebody." I said, "Oh, James, this is Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Goodwin wrote the music to 633 Squadron," because James used to watch that. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and Ron Goodwin said, "Well, James, if you like it, I'm glad I wrote it." Oh, what a wonderful thing to say. What a nice man. What a nice man. Chat.
So we've got a few questions here, Dilip. Let's see. Right. See if you rather can answer them. Not sure who this one is from, but did you find any who had been labelled LMF? I'm not sure what that stands for. How did they get on in their later months, years?
Lack of moral fibre. No, I didn't. Okay. No, not one. None. But I mean, certainly some of them were affected. And there was one particular pilot, I won't name him, a Spitfire pilot, who definitely had, PTSD. And I think I discovered why when I was doing this, because, it's a forensic reconstruction of every single combat, every single engagement, you know, throughout that 16 weeks. And he shot down a Hurricane and the pilot was killed. Friendly fire. And it's never been said anywhere else, but that's what happened. There is absolutely no question about it. And I'm pretty sure he must have known. In fact, I think the 2 squadrons involved knew. And I reckon that's why he had PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, that
survivors. He had survivor syndrome.
Survivor's guilt. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Survivor's guilt. That must be terrible to live with, mustn't it?
Dreadful.
Thank you. Chris says and asks, great presentation. Thank you very much. How do you feel about the recognition received or not received by the Polish aircrew who contributed to the Battle of Britain?
Well, I completely disagree that they've not been recognised. And it was a Polish pilot story, actually, that started me off on this journey. And I was made an honorary Pole by Polish Battle of Britain pilots at the Polish Air Force Association headquarters in London back in 1987. And boy, did we shift some grey goose that day. At that time, Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain, and communication with Poland was very difficult. After the war, when the Poles and the Czechs went home, they were persecuted because it was Soviet rule and they'd fought in the West. So they, you know, I mean, some of them were terribly persecuted by the Stalin regime. And at that time, I don't think the story was known so much, but it is now. I mean, you know, everybody knows that there were more Poles as foreign nationals in the Battle of Britain than any other nationality. And, you know, but there is a bit of a myth attached to it, because let's not forget, they'd never flown modern fighters like Spitfires and Hurricanes. They'd seen combat, some of them, but they were flying very obsolete old aircraft. So first of all, they had to learn how to fly our new modern fighters, plus the language difficulty. They had to understand English. And there's a bit of a myth about they weren't committed to the battle because nobody trusted them. That's just not true. It's nonsense. The reason they were not committed to the battle until later on was because of the English problem. And that a lot of people worked very hard to get the Poles to speak English. There were all kinds of very clever initiatives to get them to understand our commands in the air and things like that. And, you know, look, I knew lots of Polish pilots. They were wonderful people, seriously. Gandhi Jabinski, Ludwik Martel, Antoni Markiewicz. I mean, I knew loads of them. And they were really special people, very hospitable, very kind, very generous, wonderful people, but very badly treated after the war. And it all rolls back to the Cold War and to the Stalin problem. And I remember Gandhi Jabinski saying to me that in 1945, he applied for British citizenship, but he was told that when he arrived in the country, he'd arrived as an illegal immigrant. When he came in with the Polish Air Force, you know, when they were being evacuated via Romania. I mean, absolutely terrible. Plus, they were told not to turn up at the Victory Parade in 1945, which was shocking. And I founded the Malvern Spitfire team in 1986 with a friend of mine, Andy Long, to excavate the crash site of a Polish Spitfire and to erect a memorial to the pilot. And it was unveiled by Gandhi Jabinski and Ludwik Martel, both of whom had flown Spitfires in the Battle of Britain. And I remember walking up the lane for Gandhi and Ludwik to unveil a memorial, and Gandhi saying to me, Dilip, you know, we were told not to turn up to the big Victory Parade in London in 1945. This is our Victory Parade, and thank you. And you know, terrible. But there's been lots of books written about the Poles now. I've written some. Got another one coming out actually about the Poles imminently. Approve the proof this afternoon. So, you know, it's not an unknown story now. And I do, you know, the greatest respect. I wish people would stop saying that, because it was true at one time, but it's not true now. We've got enormous respect for the Poles. The story is well documented, and I think it's pretty well known now.
Thank you, Dilip. Bob asks, what did the RAF pilots think of their Luftwaffe pilot adversaries? Did they hate them, admire them?
I think it depends who you speak to. They admire, you know, of course, there is a bond, I think, between servicemen, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
And a bond certainly between fighter pilots who are fighting alone 5 miles high. And I think that there was, I remember David Cox, who flew Spitfires with 19 Squadron in the Battle of Britain. And I remember going to David's house in Reading, and he got a lot of Robert Taylor prints, you know, signed by German pilots, framed around the house. And I said, oh, well, that's pretty unusual. You know, you've got like loads of Focke-Wulf 190s and ME 109s all around the house. And he said, well, why not? They were brilliant. I hear his voice in my head now. Why not? They were brilliant, he said. And they were, because the Germans were all professional airmen. And probably what people don't realize is that the Royal Air Force in 1939 was largely an amateur service. You've got the volunteer reservists, the ground school boys, and then you've got the socially and economic elite auxiliary air force, all amateurs, and then a very small cadre of the regular service. Whereas the Luftwaffe, they were all professional airmen. They were all full-time professional airmen. And they'd seen combat, and they were good. Mm-hmm. They were good. And they got a damn good airplane in the ME 109, which was technically superior to the Spitfire in 1940, and better armed. It got two 20mm cannon, so you know, and fuel injection. So they were good, and there's no doubt that you know, all of the pilots I knew, I mean, they respected their adversary, and vice versa.
Mm. Thank you. Scott asks, fascinating talk, thank you. I think the Westland Whirlwind was a phenomenal fighter and was underused. What's your view?
The Crikey, they called it. Well, I think that the Whirlwind was a good idea to pack those 4 20mm cannon in the nose so that it gave the ME 110 something to think about, but it just wasn't a successful airplane. There were so many technical problems with it that it was just superseded, really. There were 2 Whirlwind squadrons, and they did see action, not in the Battle of Britain, but they did afterwards, but not for very long. And it really, what happened was the Whirlwind was superseded by the Hawker Typhoon and Tempest. And there were a lot of problems with the Typhoon to start with, carbon monoxide poisoning of pilots being one. But they were overcome, and the Typhoon and the Tempest, and the Typhoon particularly, you know, became like the equivalent of the American A-10 in Iraq, and you know, I think that's a brilliant airplane, the A-10. So yeah, they're actually rebuilding a Whirlwind, or building a replica Whirlwind, and parts of it are on show at the excellent Kent Battle of Britain Museum down at Hawkinge. So if you're ever down there and you want to know anything about Whirlwinds, go and speak to my pal David Brocklehurst down there.
Scott, you need to get down there, my friend.
Yeah,
Carl asks,
not to be missed.
Great presentation. Did you get a lot of information from the Air Ministry casualty files?
Oh yeah, huge. Yeah, I mean, that changed everything. When the Air 81 files were released, and they've still not all been released, they released them in batches. Oh, fascinating. You know, I mean, I've been looking at some this afternoon. Absolutely amazing stuff in there. And there's Keith Gilman, Pilot Officer Keith Gilman, who was missing from Hawkinge, Hurricane Pilot, 25th of August 1940. I got his casualty file because he was a poster boy. He was on the front cover of, I think it was Picture Post or Life magazine, one of the two. And, you know, he's wearing his flying helmet and looking up at the sky. Great picture. But he was missing. And I got his casualty file. And in there is a letter from his father, 1947, to the Air Ministry, because he read in the papers of a British serviceman turning up in a hospital in France who'd lost his memory. And he said, you know, there's never been any news whatsoever about my son since he was reported missing on the 25th of August 1940. Is it possible that this could be him? And it's just so sad.
Mm.
The no closure, 1947, you know, and then there's the response from the Air Ministry, you know, that says this person was not a member of the Royal Air Force at any time, you know, and we're very sorry and we extend our deepest sympathy on the loss of your son. But, you know, things like that and casualty files, it's sad reading.
Mm.
But yes, lots of information in those.
Okay, we got another question here from go. Is this being recorded? As I had a delay to getting in. Yes, it is, and it'll be available on YouTube pretty much as soon as we finish this. Bob asks, thanks for an enjoyable hour. There are so many myths and false histories about the battle. Which ones strike you as the most? Why on earth do people think that?
The most complicated thing about the Battle of Britain is the big wing and the controversy, which was Douglas Bader's idea to get him and 12 Group into the battle. It's very complicated. Tactically, it was nonsense. And it caused more problems than anything. I mean, we know now that the wing overclaimed by as much as 7-1. And those claims were accepted at the time. So it looked as though 12 Group had got it right, and Keith Park, Mr. Fantastic, which he was down in 11 Group, had got it wrong because he was fighting the battle preserving his resources with smaller flexible formations or a wing of 2 Spitfires at high altitude when the need arose. And then you've got the personalities involved, Dowding, Stuffy Dowding, and Keith Park, the New Zealander. I don't think they were really necessarily people. And they were absolutely 100% dedicated to preserving this country and creating a system of air defense that was going to do just that. And at the time, the air power doctrine all revolved around bombers. It revolved around there was this thought process that the bomber will always get through. And even Trenchard, the father of the Royal Air Force, famously said that fighters are only of any value just to keep up the morale of one's own people, because the bomber will always get through. There's no Stanley Baldwin, Prime Minister, told the House that there's no power on earth is going to protect you from German bombers. So and the idea was that the bomber force would be able to deliver a knockout blow to the enemy's military and manufacturing capacity without the land forces even having to fight a battle. That's what they actually thought. Of course, in the event, that didn't happen, you know, and by bombing civilian populations, it would terrify people and get them to rise up against their own government and to get them to sue for peace, you know. I mean, that's what it all revolved around. So anybody come along going, hello, I need loads of money because I need to buy new Spitfires and new Hurricanes, and I need radar, and I need this, and I need that. You've got no chance. So Dowding and Park were totally dedicated to this, and they didn't make any friends as a result in the Air Ministry or at Westminster, and they just absolutely didn't care. They went for it. So when the big wing thing came about, Lee Mallory up in 12 Group, Air Vice Marshal, officer commanded, never flown a fighter, never had anything to do with fighters. It was one of those sort of career progression postings, and he just happened to be commanding a fighter group when the Battle of Britain happened and Dunkirk happened. And the amount of mistakes he made are just phenomenal. And he hated Dowding. He told Keith Park that he was going to do everything in his power to get Dowding sacked. So you've got all of that going on. And you've got Keith Park and Air Marshal Douglas, who was then the Deputy Chief of the Air Staff. You know, they got a few going back to the 1920s. Dowding and Trenchard had fallen out in the First World War. And although Trenchard was out of the Air Force, he was still hugely influential. And then Bader's adjutant, Peter MacDonald, was an MP, and he spoke to Churchill, and the politicians got involved. So the hatchets came out for Dowding. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It's a stain on the history of the Royal Air Force in its finest hour, in the same way that at Arnhem, in Operation Market Garden, when General Urquhart was hiding in an attic, all of the other senior officers were arguing amongst themselves about who was going to take over in his absence. And meanwhile, people are being killed, aren't they? It's terrible, you know. But the big wing is the thing. The big wing and the dates and the fact that a certain German ace was a demonstrable liar. and some of his claims just nonsense. So, but that's it in a nutshell. I mean, there's loads, absolutely loads to talk about.
It clearly is. Thank you. Richard asks, was the potential capability of the Luftwaffe to cause damage perhaps overrated in that bombers didn't have massive bomb loads?
Oh yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the Luftwaffe was designed as a tactical air force to support the army on the move, and they were very good at that. Look what they did in Poland, and with the fall of France. Stukas and moving, flying artillery, effectively softening everything up for the army to move it. Absolutely brilliant. Strategically, no, the bomb loads weren't big enough. They were medium bombers, Heinkel's, Junkers 88s, Dorniers. They hadn't got the capacity to bomb anybody into submission, although they caused a lot of damage. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But then when you think of the Allied strategic bombing offensive, where you've got the Americans by day with the B-17s, the B-24s, and the RAF by night with the Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, Wellingtons, this is a massive operation. And these are aircraft with big bomb capacities. So there was no way the Luftwaffe was not equipped to do that. So it was being asked to do a job that it just couldn't do. But it was a bit of a gamble because Göring was so overconfident, and he really genuinely believed that 4 or 5 days of good weather he could destroy the Royal Air Force. But one of the reasons for that was because Luftwaffe intelligence was terrible. They had the worst intelligence officer the world has ever produced, and he just told Göring thankfully he just told Göring what he wanted to hear. So all of their strategy was misinformed, right from the blue paper that he wrote before the Battle of Britain, in which he got just about everything wrong about how fighter command was organized and controlled. So they just didn't understand. So right mess. There's so many things, fascinating things, really.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a few more here in the chat. We'll just see if we can get through these. We've got about 7 or so minutes. Patrick says, great fan of your work.
Oh, yes, that's a good start.
It is,
well
isn't
done,
it?
Patrick.
You'll answer
Thank
any
you.
question after this point.
Thank you. Yeah.
Enjoying listening to you. Have you sponsored Henry M. Ferris on the BOB more?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm
111
planning to
Squadron.
sponsor Cecil Height, who crashed and died around
Bournemouth.
I live.
Yeah, well done.
Grant, hello, Grant. Is there an in to talk at schools to educate the pupils on World War II, as it is part of our national curriculum for history?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of people do try and do that, either independently or at one time, the Battle of Britain Historical Society was very good at reaching out and doing that. So, yeah, there are people out there who try their best,
Ellen says First Light was a great movie.
Yes, absolutely. I'll tell Matthew, he'll like to hear that. Yeah.
Patrick also said, what did you think of the Polish and British films about 303 and the recent film about Paddy Finucane, if I'm pronouncing that right?
Being perfectly honest, I couldn't bring myself to watch any of them. I watched about the first 5 minutes of the Polish films. They're both the same, aren't they? Hurricane and 303 Squadron. And I just switched it off. And the Finucane one, I haven't watched. I struggle a bit with modern films.
That's a whole nother subject, isn't it? We don't have time to go into modern film.
No, we don't.
Production. Grant asked, I know that the Battle of Britain is still remembered every year in the RAF with dinners in the office.
Only just. Yeah, gone.
Officers and the warrant officers and senior NCOs messes. It is also commemorated by the Royal Air Force Association. But Grant goes on to say, Dilip, you are a fantastic storyteller. Your passion brings it all alive, and I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
I hope I have covered off. Is there another question? Oh, yes, First Light is not available to watch at the moment, but you've made me chuckle because it's 15 years old.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you can get the DVD though. You can get it on DVD.
DVD. We buy DVD still, Dylan?
Yeah, well, if you want to watch it, you've got to. You can't stream it, much to Matthew's annoyance, because he says it's the short-sighted BBC. Don't get him started on that. But yeah, get the DVD, watch it. It's brilliant.
Cool. Quick trip to eBay, everybody. I think that's what we need to do. Have you frozen, Dilip? Are you still there? I think. Can somebody just drop me a message to say that they can still hear and see me, please? Okay, so I think Dilip's internet has frozen. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. I don't know if Dilip can still hear me, but I was about to wrap it up anyway, and I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dilip, for what has been an absolutely fascinating talk. And I do agree that with the comments about how you bring the subject to life and you're completely engaging. So, and obviously Dilip's left the call, so he might come back in. I would quite like to see if he does, if everybody would just bear with me. Maybe I should play you a song or something like that to just while away the time, see if he comes back into the call. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does. Maybe it's worth reminding you all that we have a whole season of these on the line talks booked up, or episodes booked up until December. I know also what I could do is I could put some of this. I think Dilip sent me a link. Here he is.
Sorry about that.
That's right. I was just in the process of thanking you because you froze.
Oh, right.
Thought I have to carry on, but everybody could be in. And I was about to say, oh, you've left the call. I'm sure you'll come back in. So
Yes, you're right.
I will repeat what I said, Dilip. I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing that. And I think
Pleasure.
some of the
Anytime.
comments that thank you. And some of the comments about bringing it to life, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think you are a wonderful.
Have we got time for one more story? One more story.
One more story. Go for it.
Very quickly. Peter Fox, one of my favorites, 19 years old, Hurricane pilot, first sortie, gets shot down 30th of September 1940 over Lyme Regis, bails out. In 93, we found the Hurricane crash site, and you have to apply to the Ministry of Defence for a license to recover it. So I applied for the license in Peter's name as a member of our group. We went and dug up a few bits of the Hurricane with Peter there. He absolutely loved it, had a great time. And then you've got to submit a returns form saying what you've found, so that the MOD then transfer rights of ownership from the Crown to the license holder. So when I did that in Peter's name, the ownership was transferred to him, which makes him the only Battle of Britain pilot to ever have owned his own aircraft, even if it was in a million pieces. How about that? Brilliant.
That is brilliant. Fantastic. That's a good ending story. I'm sure you might have done that before. But again, thank you so much for doing that. Really do appreciate your time. And I would say, when you've written some more books, since this seems like there's plenty in the pipeline, I'd love to have you back on board and we can talk about those if you'd be up for it.
Yeah, brilliant. Anytime, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, for kind comments as well. It's always encouraging.
Yes, and thank you for everyone for joining us. And thank you again, Dilip. And I will hopefully speak to you again soon.
Yeah, look forward to it. These questions, am I able to answer them when we finish this or not? No, maybe not.
Short answer is I don't know. I think it does save the questions, actually. I would have to check.
I'll have a look.
But if you do have any other questions, just email me, because you'll have got that through Zoom, and I will be able to pass those on to Dilip. So if there are other questions that you may have thought of or inspired by Dilip's talk, then please send them to me and we will sort something out.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, young man.
Splendid.